did you go to school?
What do you think of what's going on right now, mate?
These evil little invisible parasites.
Satan-worshipping Freemason moron.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
We're not run by factions.
Get the fuck out of camera!
There are much more powerful international forces in play.
Is this pink eye? Is this what pink eye is? I don't fucking know what's happening.
Please go outside and look at the moon quickly.
It's been crazy, guys, but guess what? It's how it is, mate.
Mate, because I want to do you slowly.
But I ain't spending any time on it.
Well, g'day listeners and welcome to the Conditional Release program. We've got a special program today. I have an interview with Peter McCluskey. Peter's wife suffers from ME/CFS, that's Myalgic Encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, and she's suffered from it for many, many years. And Peter's here to talk to us today about the difficulties she's had, not just with the chronic condition herself, but the difficulties she's had in having medical science and those in charge of it not taking this condition seriously. So, Peter, welcome to the Conditional Release program.
Thank you, Jack, and thanks for the opportunity to tell the story. It's a pretty awful story, but I think it's something that needs to be told.
It certainly is. So, tell us what ME/CFS is.
Okay, so many people will sort of know it as chronic fatigue syndrome. Some people will sort of know it as long COVID because a lot of people who have not recovered properly from COVID have gone on to get symptoms of ME/CFS. The ME part of it, which is the preferred term for many people with the illness, is myalgic encephalomyelitis. And for those who don't know Latin, that means muscle pain with inflammation of the brain and spinal cord. So it's a bit controversial, the term about chronic fatigue syndrome, which we can get into a little bit later. But it's a really serious illness. Studies showing that many people with the illness have this worse quality of life than people with late stage cancer and a number of other illnesses. And there's real variation on the severity of it. So the severity can be from just having to rest more regularly and not being able to exert yourself too much, right to extremes where there's some people who are completely bedbound, completely sensitive to light, noise, smell, human touch. So they're really locked away in a cocoon, and even to the point where many of them can't eat, even that the digestion is too much exertion for them, so they have to be stew fed. The core, the key symptom of ME/CFS is a post-exertional malaise, or PEM, as those who have the illness call it. And what that means is that you, if you go and do something, and that activity could be physical or cognitive, or it could even be emotional, that can lead to a crash that lasts for weeks or days or longer. For my wife, she can have a crash after watching a movie on Netflix. If she goes out and has lunch with a friend, then she knows that it's, there's probably 2 or 3 days of pain, and she doesn't really get the symptoms to come on until the next day. So it's quite tricky in that sense, and that's why it's a confusing illness for people who have friends or family that have ME/CFS, because when they do see them out and about, they seem to be they seem well. So it's that makes it a very difficult illness to deal with. It's not fixed with rest. So if you sleep, people with ME/CFS, they often have sleep issues, but the sleep is also unrefreshing. And Jenny's had sleep studies to show that that's in fact the case. He doesn't have the true refreshing sleep that normal people do. And it affects multiple systems in the body. So you'll have flu-like symptoms. Imagine you get, when people get the flu, they think this is the worst couple of weeks of my life or whatever. But people with ME/CFS have flu symptoms almost every day. They have nausea, brain fog, and headaches. So it's sometimes compared to a bit like dementia in that, particularly if Jen exerts herself cognitively, her brain stops sort of working and she has word-finding issues, etc. All sorts of pain, digestive issues, and that sensitivity to the light, sound, smell, and touch. But for my wife, Jenny, it's sound in particular she's very sensitive to, and smell. So, she could just about get a job at an airport as a sniffer dog. She's able to detect smell, and it can smell itself and cause a crash for her. So for me to do some painting in the house is a tricky thing for her.
Yeah.
Another thing is a thing called POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is a bit of a mouthful. But that's what people get when if they stand for too long, they become a bit dizzy. And Greg Wiggle is someone who had POTS and had that sort of those sorts of issues.
So when we're going to deal with nomenclature a little bit later, but when people hear the CFS, there's a couple of things to note about that. Chronic fatigue. It seems that there's a perception in the community and perhaps among medical science too that it is just an excessive sort of fatigue, and really a good lie down and should sort it out. Now, you're telling our listeners now that it is a multidimensional sort of condition that affects people really, really badly. I mean, you've identified in our discussions before this interview that a number of people with ME/CFS have died through malnutrition, simply can't bring themselves to feed.
Yeah, there's some really sad stories out there, and those that are really severe, there's no care plan in place in Australia. So, if you're at a point where you really need to be sort of hospitalised, we've had situations where we've been in triage at ER where ED, where we've had triage nurses grab their phone and you'd see they're like Google searching to find out what the condition is, right?
Good old Dr. Google.
Yeah, the good old Dr. Google. Like sometimes you can use it when you haven't had no training on an illness that impacts we think about 250,000 people in this country.
Yeah, those are really significant numbers, aren't they? So about 250,000 people have been diagnosed either with long COVID or with ME/CFS. Your wife developed symptoms of ME/CFS many years ago. Tell me, before we start, when that time came, what was life like for your wife and yourself when you first met? And she was a very active woman. You sent me photos of her touring the world, backpacking around the world. Very active person. Yeah,
Jenny was one of these people who just lit up a room wherever she went somewhere, and always the last to leave a party, which I found was a pretty good attribute for someone that I wanted to partner with. But yeah, she was unbelievably intrepid with her travel. So, she travelled overland from London to Kathmandu. So if you draw a line on the map between those two places, there's some pretty interesting countries you go through.
Yeah,
so
there's some skull and crossbones countries there.
She was in Iran. In fact, one of the places that was bombed the other day, she was telling me that, that's a lovely part of Iran. She was there just at the end of the Iran-Iraq war. And, she made her way through, Pakistan. She didn't go to Afghanistan at that time. It was a bit tricky then, but she went all the way through. She's sort of person who loved bushwalking. She was, one trip she did, she was airdropped into remote Tasmania and spent 7 days walking out with some friends. So that was the sort of person that And she was a speech pathologist, loved her job, was just one of those people who just was really active and wanted to take on the world.
And when did the first signs or symptoms of ME/CFS present themselves to your wife? What year now are we talking about?
Yeah, so we got married in 1992, and I often think that when you taking the wedding vows and it refers to in sickness and in health, I should have read the fine print a bit more closely. Because it's the sort of thing when you're up at the altar, you think, when we're 70 or 80, I'll worry about that.
Yeah.
So we were 11 months in, and I had a job that gave me lots of travel, and I had a trip to the UK and to California. It was a 3-week work trip, and so we were just married. And I said to Jen, why don't you just come with me, take some leave, and you can catch up with some friends in the UK while you're there, etc. What happened with her is that, like a lot of people, she picked up a bug on the plane, and it looked like flu. She had just like a true flu, not like the sniffles, but she was bedbound in a hotel while I was going off to work, and from there she didn't really properly recover. And so she sort of went back to work, and she was in a situation for a long time where she'd be trying to work, and then, lunchtime she'd sneak away and have a rest in her car, no sound, just rest in the car so she could take on the rest of that time. And she was actually one of the lucky ones, because she was diagnosed within a year or so, because a friend that she worked with, she was telling her about it, and she said she'd heard about it, and there was this tape that she had that described the illness. So she went to a doctor and described it, and the doctor said, it sounds like that's what you've got. But some people go for 5-10 years before they can get diagnosed, because very few doctors are actually trained on it and are too scared to call it out.
And that's part of the problem, isn't it? So just to conclude on this, your wife was first diagnosed in 1993, so she's been living with this condition now for 32 years.
Yep.
And as I understand it, it was immediately debilitating post-infection, let's say influenza of some type infection.
Yeah, and so but it was sort of mild.
So it's got worse over the years.
For Jenny it's been progressive. And part of that is some of the treatments that she's been put on as well. There's some of the treatments, just like many people with the illness, some of the treatments are harmful, and we're still fighting that.
We'll talk about the treatments and why Australia is so far away from accepted treatments elsewhere, and the reasons for that in a moment. But you reached out to me after you'd appeared. I mean, you do volunteer work for Emerge. You might just quickly want to tell us what Emerge is. Emerge is an awareness group of volunteers, I gather, to increase awareness about ME/CFS.
So Emerge is a body that runs on the smell of an oily rag, but it's a body that provides support and advocacy for people with ME/CFS, and now for people with long COVID. And they provide a tele nurse service, and provide some advice on how to live with ME/CFS, because you won't get good advice in many cases from the
Dr. Google's not going to be of much use in that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of in a situation where Dr. Google is probably better than a lot of the doctors out there, right?
All I'd say is that, I have done the Dr. Google on ME/CFS, and there's just a plethora of opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's part of the problem.
It's tricky. Yeah. So I would not normally say that Dr. Google is your friend with an illness. But when you go and see a GP and you say that you've got ME and the doctor looks at you strangely, doesn't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to fall back on something else.
And there's an assumption there that we'll get into. But as part of your role with Emerge, you appeared on SBS, the SBS Insight program, as a member of a panel, I gather, or were you sitting in the audience? I haven't seen the program, but there were a number of people on it, as I understand it, who were either suffering from ME/CFS or were family members like yourself of sufferers. And the program also had a woman by the name of Anaya Smiley, I believe a Dunedin-based school teacher, and she claimed to have cured herself. And not only that, Peter, it seemed that she took up a lot of the program's time with what I can only assume is some sort of crank nonsense about alternative healing, shall we say?
Yeah, it was. SBS went to Emerge and asked if Emerge had some people who come in the program, and I was nominated as a carer. There's also a doctor who specialises in ME/CFS who was put forward. But they found other people who had other conditions. So the common thread between
invisible illness was the program's title.
That was the program. And so there was one guy who spoke about migraines and how he's had his battle with that. And then there was others who they described different. And if to the uninitiated, if you watched it, it looked like all the others had different illnesses, but the common thread was that all of them had ME/CFS. One of them was actually told that she wanted to tell viewers that she had ME/CFS, and she was told she wasn't allowed to do that. She had to say she had chronic fatigue syndrome. And she spoke, and then I spoke shortly after that, and then I told everyone that my wife had ME/CFS. So it was. Was that cut?
Was that cut? The ME/CFS reference, was that cut from?
No,
I
was allowed program? To. Yeah, I was allowed. In fact, I was asked what ME/CFS stands for. And so you can imagine she was sitting there thinking, well, hang on, I've been told I'm not allowed to say it. My condition. I'm not allowed to use a terminology around my condition that I like to use, and many people with the illness like to use. So the common thread amongst 5 of us on the program, so there's a panel of 10 people, and 6 had, invisible illnesses. And 5 of those common thread all of them would say they had ME/CFS. And they also had other things like fibromyalgia and POTS that I mentioned earlier, and one had Crohn's disease and some other things as well. But the common thread is what they had was ME/CFS, right?
So overtly, this is a useful program to raise awareness, but then the program seemed to have become obsessed with the story of the Dunedin teacher, Anaya Smiley. And you were concerned by the conclusion of the recording of that program that's the way it had gone. And ultimately, when you saw the edited version, it's taped live and then edited. Tell me, to what degree did Ms. Smiley take up the program? To what percentage?
So you could just tell. In fact, I got confused in it because she was. I was thinking that what I need to do is give, short, sharp answers to questions.
Yeah.
Which early on is what I was trying to do. And then they went to her and it was like, she was giving this like
reading War and Peace.
Yeah. And then we're just sitting there watching and then I went to answer a question later on and I was quickly cut off. I thought I can be a little bit more broader in my response, and I got a third of the way through and they cut me off.
So by the end of the program, you had concerns about where this was going.
Yeah, and so I did have. What I did is after the recording, and I'll go back to what the conversations I had with the producer afterwards. But after the recording, there's 10 people who are invited on the program. So on average, everyone should get 10% of the time, right?
Right.
I got about 8 or 9% of the time, I think it was. The doctor who was who was like the specialist who could answer every question about, what is the illness, what's the pathology of it, what are the treatments, etc. He wasn't asked any of those questions,
Wow.
right? And he got about 11 or 12 minutes, maybe, about 12% of the time. And Naya, who cured herself, she got 25% of the time.
25% of the time, yeah. So when you saw the cut up product go to air, was that percentage still there, or was it even enhanced, amplified a bit more?
So I went to a producer after the recording and said, because I was actually confused, because I tried to answer one question, I was cut off. I said, well, what's going on there? Because I heard Anaya speaking, and she was given like a blank canvas to tell her full story, and I was cut off. He said, oh, no, it's okay, because we're just looking for a little bit more, because we had some answers. We already had some answers to the questions earlier. And I said, but, she got a hell of a lot of time. What was going on there? He said, oh, we were just trying to get a little bit more from her, but don't worry, it's all going to be cut back. So I actually, so what she said on the program was that she listened to her body, all this sort of wellness sort of stuff.
Nonsense, yeah.
And she cured herself. Right, one day she just woke up, and next minute she's running marathons. Right, and to other people, not just the people in the room who struggle to make it to the bathroom, and but also people at home. This is what we wanted to hear, right? It's well understood that only about 5% of people recover from the illness, and we don't want to hear recovery stories. It's about invisible illnesses. We wanted to hear about people with invisible.
Exactly right. Illness. So she also claimed that she had cured herself of rheumatoid arthritis. She used the same
technique to cure herself of that, right?
In the same sweep. So you were very concerned about all of that. I mean, Ms. Smiley's got her own story to tell, and as you say, it was sort of wildly inappropriate to give her that sort of airtime on a program about about conditions like ME/CFS. But there she was saying she cured herself. What steps did you take once the program went to air, Peter?
Yeah, so there was a lot of anger in the community, because we're talking about an illness that doesn't get the level of support that is needed in many different ways, and a lot of people have struggled with their own family members. So I was looking on Facebook. There was a lot of excitement about it on the lead up to it. And then afterwards, what happened is that there was just anger from the community, and there was just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of angry posts to SBS. One person described how they've got a partner that doesn't believe that it's a real illness. And so that was their opportunity to sit down with their partner and other family members to show this is what it's really like. And in the end, that person was told, why can't you just be like a name?
Yeah, that's the issue, isn't it? That the programs sought to trivialise the condition itself by giving airtime to someone who claimed that by simply listening to her body, she could cure herself for not just one but two chronic conditions. The conditional release program, this is the sort of crankery we deal with on a fairly regular basis. So obviously there are steps that you could have taken and did in regard to that program. And where are we with that at the moment?
Yeah. So SBS as a public broadcaster has a ombudsman, and they've got a code of practice. And I could see, and many others could see, that they breached 4 clauses of their own code of practice. So we firstly we sent in complaints, and they're going to the ombudsman. Now, even Emerge, the organisation I work with, they put up a post on Facebook from the CEO expressing their dismay and also the hurt. They responded in good faith to a request to put people on the program, and then they just used Merge and used the people put forward as playthings. So that's happened. I've also got Amanda Mead from The Guardian. God bless her. She picked up on the story and she's written an article about it, about a number of us who have concerns and have put complaints in. And her focus is on the media. The four of us have put out a joint statement as well, which is to express our concern and what the complaint is, and that's all been submitted. So I think the first complaints would have been going in late May, and I think we've got 60 days to respond. So probably in the next 3 weeks we'll be hearing something from them, and hopefully they treat this seriously.
And we'll keep our listeners updated with the response there. This is a program. I don't want to get into the motives on this particular episode, but this program has platformed some rather wacky people over time, and I think there's personally, I believe there's a sort of cultural issue there. But good on you for having a crack at it.
Yeah, and just getting back to my conversation with the producers after the show was recording, and so in person in the studio, and also by very phone call afterwards, I spoke to one of the producers that was looking after me, and I told him this is going to be really triggering. I said there's going to be a lot of people who are really upset with what's been recorded.
How did he respond?
He assured me that all of a lot of Naya's stuff was going to be cut back. And I said, well, you probably need to have Lifeline and Go and Blue messages on the program, because the suicide rate for people with ME CFS is studies have shown it's about 6 or 7 times the general population, and the number one reason that people commit suicide is because they're not believed. Right.
That's it. I mean, and we're moving on now, the SBS program, the Ombudsman there will respond in due course. But this is part of the overall problem. And it was sort of manifest in that program, what we might call the psychologization of this condition, that basically people who suffer from it, it is psychosomatic, so therefore by sheer force of will they might be able to cure themselves. I mean, that was the devastating message of that program, but it's also a devastating message that you get from medical science. Often these are the responses that you've had to endure and your wife has had to endure over the journey. Let's start with that nomenclature, because there is a problem there, isn't it? When we look at CFS, bearing in mind what the SBS producer had told another guest on that program, not to use the ME, but to use CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. A couple of things about that. Firstly, a syndrome is not a condition, is it? So it is assumed that there are people suffering from it, but there is no great diagnostic body of evidence behind it. Would that be a reasonable thing to assume about calling something a syndrome? Irritable bowel syndrome is another case, of course.
Yeah. So the term syndrome is problematic. I think that the real problem is chronic fatigue part of it. MS. If you Google, here we go, Dr. Google again. But if you Google multiple sclerosis and ask what are the 4 symptoms of multiple sclerosis, one of the first things that comes up is fatigue.
Yeah.
They don't call multiple sclerosis chronic fatigue syndrome. Right? Yeah. They don't call Parkinson's disease, chronic shaking syndrome. And the problem with chronic fatigue syndrome is when people say they've got it, the common response is, oh yeah, I get tired too. But you don't get, there's another 30 symptoms that are listed as things that, are tied in with chronic fatigue syndrome. And, just to feel tired, that would probably not be such a big deal, right? It's all the other terrible stuff.
That's the other element of that nomenclature, chronic fatigue. So the condition is really just one of tiredness, a syndrome related to overwhelming tiredness. And it's much more than that, as you've indicated. I told you a story that probably predates your wife's diagnosis by a year or two. I was at a dinner party with a number of people, and one of those was explaining pretty much not just to me but to the rest of the table what it was like to have. There was no ME in those days. It was probably about 1990, and she had. She's explaining the difficulty she had with chronic fatigue syndrome. I suspect her husband, who was a work colleague of mine, didn't really believe it as well. But also at that dinner party was a psychiatric registrar. So this is a fellow who's done his medical training, and he was a registrar at a large Melbourne suburban hospital, who just turned around to her and told her, "It's all in your mind." And I remember that because I met this woman a number of years later after basically there was further diagnostic efforts around ME. And I said to her, "How do you feel now about that conversation?" And she said, "I just thought it was so ridiculous." So this was a person basically pouring her heart out to people that she considered to be friends or friends of friends, and just being told then, "It's all in your mind." Now, this is something that your wife has had to deal with for more than 30 years, and ME sufferers generally.
Yeah, and it gets to the point where some people just give up and stop going to the doctor because they, being gaslit. And some doctors have actually told family members, that it's all in their heads, and so don't give them any support because they need to get moving, right?
Extraordinary.
So
yeah.
it's pretty bad. My daughter also has ME/CFS. We can talk about that a little bit more. But she went to a doctor one time, and she tried to get into the usual doctor at the practice, and he wasn't available. So or she wasn't available, so she went to another doctor, and she explained that she had ME/CFS, and within 3 minutes of this doctor first seeing her ever, he said to her that it was all on her head. She's just depressed. Here, I'll write you a script for antidepressants.
And that seems to have formed the basis of the formal strategy. So what we got, let's just go back a step. GPs are the gatekeepers to the system. So if you have ME/CFS and you see a GP who believes that your condition is psychosomatic, that will immediately stop all forms of reference to other specialists. We'll get to those in a minute. But that's the big part of the problem, that we have general practitioners across the country. Would you say it was the majority or at least a substantial minority who do not believe that ME/CFS is a diagnosable condition?
I think those numbers have improved over time. And I think COVID has changed things a little bit because some of them have seen their colleagues who have not recovered from getting COVID. But I wouldn't like to put a number on it, but it is a significant number out there. And what you need to do is doctor shop. Sometimes it's just the body language of the doctor. You can just tell that they just want to get you out of there as soon as possible. And so you just got to find people who believe you. And, finding a doctor that actually believes you've got a real condition is for many people with ME/CFS, a dream.
In Jen's experience, in your experience, you said that she was diagnosed fairly early, and that was presumably overseas in the UK. Is that right? Have I got that right?
No. So we were just on work trip for a few weeks, and we came back,
right,
and she was diagnosed here in. We live in Melbourne, yeah. So
obviously there was a solid GP there. But tell me, over the 30 odd years that Jen has suffered this, how many doctors, GPs, etc., have looked at her as if she was half mad and not believed her?
Oh, there'd be dozens.
As a percentage, if you wouldn't mind. So is it more than half? Is it half of the GPs that she's consulted with?
Yeah, it's probably half. But I mean, it's a blend, right? There's some who are just, have their own belief system, and they will tell you face to face that, it's all in your head, or why are you wasting my time? And then there's a big group in the middle who kind of don't really say too much, but you can read their body language. And in many cases, we're teaching them. When we go and see a doctor, Jen's always got an explainer around the illness to hand over to the doctor. So we're teaching them, and then they give us an invoice at the end of the session.
Yeah,
we've got to flip that
not
on
normally the way it
somehow.
works, but anyway.
Yeah, not normally the way it works. And they say, some of them are really good. They say thank you, but we know, a number of those just immediately throw it in the bin. But it's, there's not many conditions, serious conditions, where a big part of it is advocacy. If you've got, and yourself, Jack, you've had cancer. You don't have to go and convince the doctor that you're seeing that you've got cancer and needs to be treated seriously. And you find someone who thinks that cancer is a real thing.
Yeah, indeed. And so your wife now has a good GP, as I understand it.
Yeah. So we have a GP that just looks after the normal stuff, and then we go and see someone who specialises with ME/CFS. Now that guy, we went for a long period without having anyone, and a lot of people in Melbourne used to go and see a fellow called Don Lewis, and unfortunately he passed away. It was an elderly man, and he was fantastic. And we saw him for a period of maybe 10 years or something, from up until the 2019 or something. I think he passed away.
Oh, that's sad.
He was always terrified of being snuck off.
Was he? Yeah.
Because he was treating ME/CFS as a real biological illness and prescribing treatments. And, a lot of doctors are saying, oh, what are you doing this for, right? And now if you read studies now that are just coming out about it, it's like, a recent one is low-dose naltrexone, which is a drug that's being, studied and looked at for ME/CFS and long COVID. People go, oh, this is amazing. There's this new treatment. It's like, oh, Jen's been on that since about 2009, right? And so this is the problem. There's actually one doctor who's based in Sydney who we heard speak one time, and I think he was talking about a colleague he went through university with, and this colleague of his said, so he specialises in ME/CFS, right? And one of his mates said to him, "Why are you wasting your career on an illness that doesn't exist?"
Doesn't exist. This is precisely this psychiatric registrar's view. It's all made up. So the standard treatments now, as set out by the RACGP, as of today, we're recording this on the 1st of July 2025, the RACGP, that's the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, outlines treatments for ME/CFS. Can you tell us a little bit about them and how damaging they are?
Yeah, so there's sort of a long history in this, and it's all about the psychologizing of the illness, and kind of, early on it was referred to as hysteria. There was a study of it.
That's got such an ugly connotation, and I suppose we should say that most ME/CFS, or the predominant number of sufferers or percentage of sufferers, are women. So there's another element to this I think is gender-based. So if you use the term hysteria, we go back into some very, very dark moments in 19th century medicine around women, even in the early part of the 20th century. Yeah, so
there has been instances of outbreaks, right? And in fact, Dubbo is one place where there was an outbreak, and so what happens? It could have been Ross River, or could have been something like that. A lot of people got, and then it then causes ME/CFS. The Royal Free Hospital in London in 1955, they had an outbreak. So 300 staff suddenly came down with this syndrome.
Debilitating illness.
And what happens? It was looked at later on by people doing a study on it. They didn't interview a single person who actually was struck down by the illness, but because it was I think it was about 75% were women, or mostly women, and of course in a hospital it's mostly women anyway. But it's across the general population, it's 75% who get it. They said, "Oh, it's mass hysteria."
Wow. So they just that term
wrote a paper, was published, and said it was mass hysteria. That was the cause of that outbreak. Right?
Yeah, just that term alone is deeply and relates to women suffering menopause and all sorts of things that was located neatly into this condition known as hysteria. Anyway, tell us what the RACGP has determined, and they have followed the sort of history from the rest of the world. But tell us what, if someone presents with MEC to a GP with ME/CFS, and that doctor follows the RACGP's guidelines, what happens?
Yeah, so there's so my wife undertook treatment twice, which is called graded exercise therapy and cognitive behaviour.
Can I just stop you there? So the first thing I think about, the assumption there is get off your ass and you're a bit mad. So when we talk about cognitive behaviour therapy, you're a bit mad, and graded exercise, you're bloody lazy, get off your ass and that'll fix you. They seem to be the assumptions. Exactly. Yeah.
So when the psychiatrists, who and many of them were funded by the insurance industry, they got involved, particularly in the UK, they came up with a hypothesis that sure, there was the initial acute illness, but the reason that people have this thing that they would call chronic fatigue syndrome was that you were deconditioned, and that is because you're just laying in bed or laying on the couch and, you know, in those days watching DVDs or whatever, you were deconditioned and you need to be reconditioned, right? And then what happened is that if you, as part of that reconditioning, you develop symptoms, and I referred to earlier to post-exertional malaise, where if you overexert yourself, you get all these symptoms 24 to 48 hours later, then that was because you had false beliefs about your illness, right? Yeah. So it was kind of like
psychosomatic. Everything's psychosomatic.
Yeah, it was check and checkmate. And so, you know, Jenny went through this program, and we know lots of others who got significantly worse. They were told to push themselves, and some went from working part-time. You know, my wife was working part-time before she went into the program, and it's been mostly bed and housebound ever since.
And so what we see is this particular practice, which is still, as I understand it, what the RACGP recommends.
Yep.
People are just told to go and exercise, go and take a half an hour walk, which, as you've described, is the sort of thing that will make you bedridden for days thereafter.
Yeah.
So and actually increase the severity of the symptoms.
Yeah, that's right. So, and all of this is based on this trial called the PACE trial, which happened in the 2000s. And there's a bunch of psychiatrists, basically.
Psychiatrists again.
Yeah. Who did this study, and they found there was a lot of the media got excited about it because they got these amazing results, and people were, you know, having amazing responses to this treatment, where you grade, you know, day by day or week by week, you increase your exercise.
Yes.
And of course, at the same time, you're told that it's all kind of in your head anyway. So that's kind of how it works. Now, cognitive behavior therapy can be good for people who have chronic conditions, right? Because it helps you with dealing with
self-actualization and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, you know, how do you cope with the loss, etc.
Sure.
Right? What happened with this study was that it was very controversial from the start because, you know, a lot of patients were saying, well, I did it and it's made me worse. And there was, you know,
silence.
Thousands of people all around the world, right?
Yeah.
And what happened was that there was a FOI request that was put in by an actual patient from Perth, Australia, believe it or not, who put in the request into the UK. Alim Mathies, and he's considered to be like a hero of the ME/CFS community. He got a hell of a lot sicker by doing it because he did graded exercise therapy, and he went from being not too bad to being, you know, bedridden. So he fought, and he managed to get the release of the data. So
what happened reveal?
Was that there was a university in the UK that was asked to release the data. They refused. They spent £250,000 fighting it in the courts, right, in legal fees. And eventually that data was released. And so when the data was released, there was other people who were able to analyse the data. and they found all these anomalies. And one of them was that they changed the goal, mid period through the study, they changed the goalpost of what recovery was. Right. So they changed the criteria of recovery. And it sort of meant that some people by the criteria, had recovered before they even started. Right. They relied on just questionnaires. And the problem with that is that people who go in, and Jenny was the same. She tried all sorts of stuff. And when you fill out a questionnaire, you want to say, I'm better. And you're sort of pressured to do so,
Yeah.
There was no objective data. So they didn't do any tests on, whether they could, were any better. And so what happened is this was all released, and it became, a big story. And as a result, the health body in the UK called NDIS and the CDC have said, I don't do that.
That's right.
They've withdrawn graded exercise and cognitive behaviour therapy as being the go-to treatments for ME/CFS.
Off the top of my head, that was done in the United States in 2021, and in the UK, I think 2 years earlier.
Yeah,
but in Australia,
right,
the RACGP continues to promote graded exercise and CBT as responses as responses, GP responses to anyone who comes across their threshold with ME/CFS.
Yeah,
So we're literally at least half a decade behind.
Yeah, and so with that particular study, we've got a situation where the kind of like the peak body, the organisation that looks after people with ME/CFS, are saying on their website, and anyone who will listen, don't do graded exercise and therapy and cognitive behaviour therapy, and let the RACGP out on its own is saying, no, this is the thing. Go and do this. There was a study done on the review on the study on the guidelines. They use a tool called Agree 2, and they found it scored 28% as in not fit for purpose. They also say in their guidelines that it's many people with ME/CFS have a mental illness, and they don't cite any evidence for this. There's no evidence for that.
Well, we also you sent me a study, and I recall this actually appearing. It was released, I think, last year, or perhaps a year, perhaps into 2023, where a Queensland State Department researchers had said that long COVID doesn't exist. Again, all in the mind.
So we saw that coming through, and I thought,
here we go.
We thought, oh yeah, we've seen this movie a million times, right?
Yeah.
And so this is what people with ME/CFS faced for a long time, and then long COVID came along, and even the whole thing about long COVID. When people started to not recover from COVID, there was health professionals and well-respected people who were saying, we've never seen anything like this before. I was like, yeah, that's because you've denied that ME/CFS exists, right? So there's Jen Breyer who.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry. Jen Breyer, who has actually produced a fantastic documentary called Unrest, and you can actually find it on YouTube. It was on Netflix for a long time, but it was shortlisted for the Academy Awards as being for a documentary. So it's actually a good watch. But she tweeted on March the 15th, 2020. So think about March. What was happening March 20?
COVID
Morrison
just
gone
hit
to
Australia. COVID
it was at the same time
Australia.
Scott Morrison was saying he was going to go and see a rugby leg game, and everything was crashing around us. But she said
That's
this.
right.
She tweeted out, "Please stop telling young people they should avoid COVID-19 infection, protect the old. Tell them to protect themselves. Long-term symptoms, 6+ months post-infection, Epstein-Barr virus, 11%, Q fever, 11%, Ross River virus, 11%, West Nile virus, 31%, SARS, the original SARS from the early 2000s, 87%, Ebola, 90%. COVID-19, we have no idea." All right. So now there's been a study that came out recently, which is a longitudinal study done in the US. And the really nice thing about longitudinal studies is you're capturing people at the start of a 5-year period, and then you're checking them at the end, and it's not just a slice in time. And they found that over a 5-year period in the United States, of the thousands and thousands of people in that study, 1 in 22 people in that period after contracting COVID developed ME/CFS.
Does it mention anything in regard to the severity of that infection, that initial infection? Is there a relationship between severity of infection and developing ME/CFS? It's something that doesn't seem to be.
There doesn't seem to be, and
it needs to be studied, doesn't it?
Yeah, but there are two parts of long COVID, right? And some people, around about half of them, it's the effects of a severe infection. So we've got lung damage and all that sort of stuff. We're not talking about those people. There's another half, 40 to 50% of people who can have a very mild infection. And then they just simply don't recover, and they develop ME/CFS. But through that period, we were told, ME/CFS doesn't exist. There are people in the media then saying that ME/CFS is psychosomatic, but long COVID is real, and
some saying long COVID was psychosomatic too.
Yeah.
Well, certainly that was the view of the Queensland Health Department, or at least a portion of it.
Yeah, and so, I mean, the Victorian Health Department for ME/CFS says for graded exercise and cognitive behaviour therapy, it basically says don't do it.
Huh.
The Federal Health Department says, nah.
We're not sure.
The RACGP says to do so.
Get off your ass, you're a bit mad.
But, part of that whole long COVID story is you'll remember that the federal government set up long COVID clinics all around the country.
Yeah.
Right? So that people go to these clinics. And then what happened is that they kept them for some time, and we were looking, reading newspaper articles and hearing about people doing like singing therapy and all sorts of different, Tai Chi and all sorts of stuff as therapies for long COVID. But graded exercise therapy featured pretty heavily, and we were just thinking, and it was a long line to get into these long COVID clinics. It's like, one thing worse than having to wait to get into a long COVID clinic is actually getting to go to one. All right, and so people were likely harmed from that. But then the federal government said, "Oh, we're going to shut all of those down, all right, and we're going to let primary health look after it. So we'll get GPs to be able to help people with it." And at the same time, they said that they were going to introduce endometriosis clinics all around the place. And endometriosis is another illness that's been, that people with it, they've been gaslit as well over many years. But now they're getting some serious care. So you turn up your, elbow stands up during the election, and all you need is this card. You've got endometriosis. You go to these clinics. Well, at the same time they shut down the long COVID clinics, they said, what we're going to do is train people with to be able to diagnose and treat people with long COVID, and under that kind of maybe is ME/CFS. But the thing is, then the people who train them, it goes back to the RACGP or Emerge, right? So if you're lucky, you go and see a doctor that's been trained by Emerge, and very few of them have, or they'll just look up the guidelines and say, "Oh, I'm going to put you on graded exercise therapy."
There are a number of studies. Obviously, there is correlation to the point of causation between COVID infection and developing ME/CFS. But there's a whole raft of studies that are really, really troubling if we took the time to have a look at them, particularly in relation, we were just talking about Bobby Kennedy Jr., never far from our minds on this particular program, and the COVID vaccine in the United States has been denied for children. There is a very strong correlation between COVID infection in children and developing type 1 diabetes. Pregnant women will be refused a vaccine. When they say refused, it will not be insurable. So if you're pregnant, and you'll have to pay, I think it's around $350 US to get the COVID vaccine. Again, with COVID infection during pregnancy, there are all sorts of problems. We're seeing studies emerging, not enough of them, that say that COVID infection can lead to higher rates of early onset dementia, issues like type 2 diabetes for more elderly people or people in the middle ages. And it just seems to me that almost this pandemic, it's like, we want to shut the door on that. It was so problematic. Governments made mistakes. We don't want to highlight those. And so we're just ignoring what is potentially a health crisis down the road.
Yeah, and in the UK, they've got some statistics around the people the number of people who have stopped working or not working due to disability, and they've had a massive spike since 2020.
Well,
and at the same time, they're trying to cut people off from disability, right?
Yeah.
And
that's a simple accounting measure. And so, yes,
exactly.
we do get this really serious problem that one imagines is already starting to impact itself on health services around the country and around the world. And it all relates to COVID infection. I do want to get onto vaccines, and particularly COVID vaccines, because tell me, as a starter, let's go to, let's say, January or February 2020. How did you and Jen deal with the issue of an oncoming pandemic?
Yeah, so we were scared personally, but we were scared more universally because, we knew that, a lot of people were going to die, but anyone who was touched by ME/CFS knew that, the term was mass disabling event. And it is what we've seen. And
an immune system affected.
Yeah. And let me just quickly touch on, there's a lot of people who say, I don't know anyone with long COVID. And then I say, okay, do you know anyone who got COVID and isn't quite right since they got COVID? And they almost universally say yes. So that's kind of what long COVID is. It's when you don't fully recover from it. But in our household, there's a few things going on with us psychologically. One was, thank you, everyone. We were in Victoria, right? And for us, we were very vulnerable, right? Because, if you ever got a, severe illness, it doesn't matter what the illness is, but then you get COVID on top, it can be pretty bad. But we knew that people who have gotten other illnesses while they've had ME/CFS, their baseline reduces. So you can go from, maybe working part-time to being bedbound, or you can go from being housebound to completely bedbound and being tube-fed. So I saw a statistic one time that 20% of people, don't get back to their baseline after getting COVID if they've got ME/CFS, or something like that sort of number. So, you're feeling lucky,
Yeah, roll the dice.
We were, it's very controversial, of course, but we were very supportive of the lockdowns at the time because we just thought it was the best way of protecting people, particularly since before we got vaccines, and unfortunately it took us too long to get vaccines. The whole world was opening up, and we weren't.
The rollout was a shambles.
Yeah.
I just want to take you, just remind our listeners. So this is 250,000 ME/CFS sufferers in Australia. No, when the pandemic
that was a number estimated pre-COVID.
Pre-COVID. So as the pandemic comes to Australia, we've got 250,000 people. We're not even counting those who are immune system compromised through whatever. It may well have been chemotherapy, those sorts of things. But we are dealing with a fairly large number of Australians, a significant number of Australians, significant cohort of Australians that were under the pump when the pandemic came. You mentioned vaccines. We need to deal with that now. So come February, March 2021, we are starting to see the vaccines being rolled out in Australia. It was a failure of government in determining just getting the doses right and getting the supply right. It's not the doses, but the supply right. What warnings were you given, if any, or were given to Jen about taking a vaccine with her condition?
Yeah, so we've been, we're not anti-vaxxers. In fact, far from it. Turn us into pincushions if you want, right?
Yeah.
But when you've got ME/CFS, it is a condition where any challenge to the immune system can cause a worsening of symptoms, and most cases that will be for a few weeks, maybe.
Were you warned about this, or was
help.
Jen warned about this before she had her first or second shot?
Yeah, so when we saw Don Lewis, we were, flu could be really bad for her, but this is the doctor who passed away, unfortunately.
Right.
He suggested not getting the flu vaccine because it could worsen her symptoms. But then if she gets the flu, so we're just being very careful. But yeah, we knew that COVID was such a terrible illness, and if you didn't have any protection from it at all, that you had to take the punt. And pretty much everyone who has ME/CFS that we know of has gone on and gotten the vaccine. And many of them, it's fine, but there are some people where their condition has worsened as a result. And people are screaming out for the Novavax vaccine, which
took a long while to get there.
Well, we still don't have it, right? In Australia, right? You can't get it. So a lot of people with ME/CFS are saying, well, if I could get access to that, because it seems to be the side effects of that seem to be less. But we went into it, crossing our fingers and our toes, and I think it took about 3 weeks for Jenny to get back to the baseline after getting the vaccine. But what's happened since is that I think it was maybe a year ago or something, she got a booster, and she started to have urinary problems,
right?
And so hypersensitive urinary problems, and that's continued on. So she's now in a situation where, do I get another booster, or it'll make things worse?
Because there are high rates of COVID infection around the world. It's like the illness that everyone's forgotten about. There are high rates in New York. There are high rates in Vietnam, and really, I mean, the great anxiety around this is that there will be a mutation that the vaccines can't assist with, and it will go through this all over again. With the exception this time that we've got a significant body of the population who think the COVID vaccines didn't work, or in fact were damaging to people, killed people in their hundreds and thousands and millions and all this sort of nonsense. But I just don't think we're prepared for the next pandemic. I really don't. As a sort of collective mentality, we're just not prepared for it.
Yes. So the thing is, every medication has, If you
side effects.
You look at Panadol. Panadol, you can look at the fine print of Panadol. In rare cases, it can cause X, Y, and Z. So we've been living with this for a long time, and vaccines are fantastic things. But for people, it seems that people who get ME/CFS or long COVID have a predisposition, right? So they've got a number on their head they don't realise. Now, it could be that getting the flu or getting glandular fever or COVID is the thing that triggers it. But in some less common cases, it's not that common, but some people, the trigger is the COVID vaccine. And it could be another vaccine, right? So
yeah, it could be influenza.
It's kind of like the immune system gets triggered and then it can't turn itself off.
Yeah.
All right. And that could, you could say, and then, of course, the anti-vaxxers say, oh, see, I told you. Yeah, but that person could have got COVID the following week instead, and they'd have the awfulness of COVID, but then they'd also have long COVID.
I was just reading a study about gene mapping and some of the advances. I actually undertook a clinical study I was a participant in a clinical study around a drug called Keytruda, which is an immunological drug. It had no impact on me whatsoever, except I had a little bit of psoriasis, and now I have a lot on my leg. But and it just seemed to me at that particular time, when I'm talking about 2017, 2018, that so little was known about the immune system generally, and why a particular drug designed to, let's say, supercharge the immune system does work in a minority of people, but doesn't work for the majority. And I was just looking at a new study that looks at gene mapping and how we can get around, and how they're starting to get around these things. I just wanted to talk to you first, before we go on, about how you've dealt with, I mean, obviously it's not just GPs that you'll be consulting with, because this is a whole body condition. But you would have seen a long list, presumably by now, hematologists, neurologists, cardiologists. There'll be a whole range of specialists that Jen has seen. And how have you got on with those guys and women?
Yeah, I actually put a list together on this. There's probably 15 or so ologists that we've seen, right? And
not bursting with social skills as a rule, are they?
No. A lot of self-belief with a lot of them, to put it nicely.
And decent with the invoice too, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, some of them are very good, right? So there's actually an immunologist that we saw a week or two ago, and he not only believes the ME/CFS is real, but he has some treatments that he applies to it. And so it's nice to be face to face with someone. Before you get the $350 bill, it's nice to be face to face with someone who actually believes that it's real. But
I sort of had presumed that an immunologist would be, I guess, the best specialist to see. But you must have seen a neurologist, psychiatrists, hematologists,
cardiologists,
rheumatologist,
gastroenterologist, immunologist, endocrinologist.
So it's almost as if you've got to pick your symptom to the medical speciality.
And that's the problem. This is where we kind of need, we actually do need ME/CFS or long COVID
specialists.
You go to one practice and it's a center of excellence, because one of the things that Jen has as part of her condition is POTS. So the body doesn't regulate her blood flow, right? So if she stands for a long period, or she has to have if we sit somewhere for a long time, she'll grab another chair and put her legs up, because her blood literally just flows to her feet. And
I presume she'd have fainting spells if she's up.
Yeah, that's right. Now she we're in a world where there's some symptoms that can be treated. So you go and see a cardiologist, and POTS was one of these things, which is the Greg Wiggle thing, where that was well in your head, and then they thought, oh, actually they're doing some measurements, and they're actually finding that when people stand for a period of time, that they do tests on blood pressure, etc., and heart rate, and it changes dramatically, right? So there are some drugs you can take for that, but when you go and see the cardiologist, and they when they're called specialists for a reason. They specialize, right?
That's right.
So they'll tell you all about everything to do with the heart and everything that relates to it, but they stick to their lane, and then they don't talk to the other specialists, right?
No.
And so you just go around, and so what we do is we collect jigsaw puzzle pieces everywhere we go, but there's no one to put all those pieces together to solve the puzzle. Then there are a very few doctors who specialise in ME/CFS. I mean, we've been in this game for a long time. Unfortunately, we actually found the most recent one because our local MP we were in Higgins, Dr. Michelle Anandaraja, and we were lobbying her as part of our role as political agitists to get them to treat it seriously. And we were telling her we don't even have someone to go to. And she found someone almost by chance, and so we can see this guy. But the thing is, it's long consultations.
Expensive.
And these a lot of them go into that. Almost all. I don't think I've met a GP who specialises in CFS who have just gone into it because they're interested in it. They've gone into it because they've got family members or friends or whatever. And for them to buy their next BMW, the best thing they could do is just set up a clinic where they see people for 5 or 10 minutes and shove them out the door.
Right.
But instead, they've got to spend a lot of time and So
not what they signed up for when they started studying medicine.
But they have to charge you a lot, right? So they'll charge like a specialist. So you'll have a 45-minute session with them, and 45 to an hour, and they'll charge you. They'll charge you $350, and then it's almost like Medicare is doesn't even come in. You still look a couple $100 out of pocket, so you don't want to go and see those guys too often.
No. Tell me also about difficulties. They may not be difficulties that Jen in particular has faced, but difficulties for ME/CFS sufferers in general. Access to NDIS. I mean, we're talking about people who might be bedridden totally or bedridden for 20 hours a day. Certainly should be getting on NDIS. How is NDIS handling it? How are the insurers handling it when it comes to income protection claims, those sorts of things? And I guess how is Services Australia generally handling claims from people who have ME/CFS?
Well, the first thing they do is they tell us in the media every day that it's costing too much. That's the first thing. So there's a few different parts of this. So the first thing that we tackled, I was working, so I was means tested out of at least the disability support pension, right? But the first thing we went after was total and permanent disability, and Jen had coverage from that from a superannuation.
So it's a sort of income protection.
Yeah, that's right.
Insurance, yeah.
Yeah, and so what happened is that bit by bit, she loved her job. I was almost jealous of her at times because I'd be kicking the dog on the way in from work at night, and she would be talking about how much she loved her job. But she, bit by bit, she had to reduce her hours. She got to the point where she was working a half day twice a week, right? And that was just about killing her, right? When, many years, it was almost 10 years after she finished, we thought, oh, well, let's see what we can do with total and permanent disability, because we just thought we weren't going to be eligible at all. But anyway, we lawyered up, and it took probably 4 years, and they refused it. And because she was working so little at the end, it wasn't a massive payout, but it was definitely helpful.
Sure, but what was their immediate response? This is the insurer, did the insurer say, well, here are these medical studies that say that this is psychosomatic? Did they play that card?
No, they didn't play that card. What they did was that they...
Just be the obstinate bastards they always are.
Yeah, well...
Delay, kick it down the road.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of delay. And her super fund was actually waving the flag for us, but of course they use underwriters, right? And then with one of those big insurance companies. And what they did was that they said, oh, look, if you read the fine print, I think it's if you're working less than 10 hours a week, then you're not considered to be an employee, and so therefore you're not eligible for it. So they were very happy to take money out of the fund every month for the insurance, but we were paying for something that they decided that they weren't eligible for.
You got a claim, but it was expensive and a long, long process. What about the NDIS? What's your experience there?
I mean, NDIS is, it's an absolute minefield for people with ME/CFS. The first thing is that the assessors have no idea of anything about the illness, but they did get one consultant in. We know this for freedom of information. They did get one consultant in who said that, look, people can recover, with graded exercise, and most people get over it at some point with graded exercise and cognitive behaviour therapy, and that happened to be a guy whose business is graded exercise therapy, right?
My God. Yeah.
So In fact, I've got a quote here of someone who says, "I've just heard from the NDIA, and I've been who have denied my claim based on the fact that they have overwhelming evidence that ME/CFS is not a permanent condition and can be effectively treated with sleep, proper diet, CBT, and graded exercise therapy."
Graded exercise therapy. There we go again.
So that's one of the things. And in fact, I've got some data from the 31st of December, 2024. Remember that number, 250,000?
Yes.
Of those 250,000, it's estimated that 25% are bed or housebound. So around about 60,000 Australians are really doing it tough with ME/CFS, right? The total number of people who have been who have been now on NDIS, where ME/CFS is their primary condition, is 133.
133 out of 60,000. That is unbelievably bad. And clearly, the NDIS, there is a lot of over-servicing elsewhere. And I think there's a lot of profiteering by some companies. And the NDIS reminds me a little bit of the original Medibank that was brought in by the Whitlam government, first dip of the toe into a public or universal public health system. And that there were a lot of people claiming things. I mean, I'm talking about medicos, claiming things that weren't quite real, and it was a bit of a rort. So it's clearly NDIS can't continue the way it is, but it's also ignoring a large body of people on the basis of dodgy science, dodgy medical science.
Yeah. So most conditions are, they're categorized. So category A, that might be Down syndrome. You know, you almost immediately, you tick a box and you're in, and then there's category B, C, and D. ME/CFS isn't even categorized. So what happened was when we applied, we're one of the 133. We're one of 37 in Victoria.
Wow.
And the first challenge you have is that with other conditions that are well recognised, your bridge to the NDIS is the health system, right? So you've got
supportive, knowledgeable
GP.
GP.
Multiple sclerosis, for example, right? I'm not picking on them. They've got a terrible history. But if you've got severe multiple sclerosis, the public health system will basically pick you up, and if you've got a severe condition, there'll be case managers, there'll be psychologists, there'll be a whole bunch of people who are supporting you, not just you but your family, right? And there's people with MS who are probably listening and going, no, that's not the case. But compared to nothing, there is a lot there. So what happens is all the reports and everything you need for NDIS are built up by the system, right? For us, it took us about a year. We got 13 reports, but every time you go and ask for a report, you're handing over money because there isn't a public system to look after you, right? With a lot of other conditions, you go into the hospital system or where those reports are free. So, we spent $2,000 on an occupational therapist report. Now, we were in a position where I had a job that paid well, I was lucky, which kind of got us through, and we were prepared to roll the dice. We didn't want to die wondering, but we 13 reports.
I'm going to say of the 60,000 people in Australia with perhaps very serious symptoms of ME/CFS, only a very small minority would be able to have that capacity and persistence to see it through.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I'm in a carers sort of group. We get together on a phone, on a Zoom call once a month, sort of thing. We just support each other. And there's a young woman who's on there, and her partner got. They were both teachers, and her partner developed severe ME/CFS to the point where he has to be, cared for 24 hours a day, sort of thing.
Yep.
So he had to give up his career. She's given up her career. And now it took 2 years for them, because they had to use the public health system, because they had no money, use the public. They got it took them 2 years to get to see someone who would give him a diagnosis of ME/CFS.
And that indeed would trigger things like carers allowances, all those, or
exactly.
NDIS, etc.
Facing eviction.
So this is not just a terrible, debilitating illness. This is an illness that government, medical bureaucracy, or health bureaucracies are just not responding to. I just want to quickly touch on this. You and Jen must have been heartbroken when your daughter presented with a diagnosis of, or symptoms at least, and then a diagnosis of ME/CFS.
Yeah, that was definitely a tough time, right? So, people who were introduced to the illness for the first time, in some respects, you're protected by a naivety, right?
Yeah.
We weren't, right? So
what's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, we know what's going to happen. So, in fact, there was a specialist from Europe who came out to Australia, and we got it was almost like an audience with the Pope, and we had to put a lot of money in the collection team when it went. But anyway, we were concerned because it does seem to be hereditary. There's a lot of people who have, where the mum has ME and then a child has as well. So there's a whole bunch of tests that were done for our kids at the time, and they were young enough, they didn't know what it was all about. But with our daughter, she was found to have all sorts of food sensitivities, which is one of the signs. Vast proportion of people with ME/CFS have all sorts of, they're gluten intolerant or the fructose intolerant.
Right.
Whatever, after I go through the list and I do the shopping, I basically tip everything out of the box and cook up the box, But so what happened was that he looked at all the results for my son and he said, he'll be fine. And then he said, your daughter is at really high risk of ME/CFS. And we said, she hasn't shown any symptoms. And he said, not yet.
Not yet, but
now
we
didn't tell her until just recently. But we were always fearful. Whenever she got the sniffles or anything, she brought something home. And then there was one time she was in year 8, and year 8 is a really important year for school. That's when your true friendships start to happen.
Yeah, true.
She picked up a virus. It wasn't all that severe. She didn't recover, and we were 6 weeks in. We took him took her to see the doctor that specialises for Jen. And we probably broke a land speed record because she was diagnosed after 6 weeks. He said, look, I'm pretty convinced that she's got ME/CFS. And so, I would, at a similar time, my son was having some surgery on his feet. So, and it was just, it wasn't a serious thing, but it meant that he was wheelchair bound. And so I was going from room to room, trying to look after 3 people. While I was trying to hold down a full-time job.
Huh.
But yeah, I go in and see Jen, who, Jen's in bed 20 hours a day. She does get up and about at times and does things, but, she's in bed now with a roaring headache. And I look at her and then I go into the next room and see my daughter and I think, am I looking at her future?
Yeah, it must be worrying. I mean, your daughter, you've explained to me she obviously missed a lot of school. She got a university degree, I think, in data management or IT, and
science, yeah.
and she has a good employer who acknowledges and respects the condition she suffers from, and allows her to work part-time and get through the week that way. Not all employers are going to be that benevolent. Yeah,
that's right. And if you can find a good employer that is respectful of people with disability, some think disability means catering for disability means having a ramp, into the building,
Yeah.
And forget about all the rest. But yeah, we were lucky that when I said we were, we didn't have the naivety, so we knew how bad it could be. But at the same time, we knew that graded exercise therapy and cognitive behavior therapy was not going to be the thing. So we also went to see a pediatrician, and he was waving the flag for graded exercise therapy. We said, no way, there's no way in hell that we're going to let her go and get that treatment.
Because you knew, and indeed there are studies that reveal that sort of treatment is exactly what you don't want to do.
Yeah, and just to go back on the NDIS again, is that people have been told, I mentioned earlier, people have been told that they're not eligible for NDIS because they haven't done graded exercise therapy. So there's people that know that it's harmful, and they've got to choose between, perhaps getting support from NDIS and potentially getting significantly sicker, right? Mm. So it's a very tricky thing. So what happened is that we got her onto some treatments that were helpful to her, and we were very careful with her. And part of what you do is pacing. So you've got an energy envelope, and as long as you stay within that energy envelope, you're not going to bring on crashes.
Yes.
And the more you crash, the tighter that envelope gets, and that's the problem, right? So she missed most of year 8, and it was before lockdown, right? Mm. So that idea of kids being taught over Zoom or whatever.
No,
that wasn't a thing, right? So when lockdown came and she was studying, and she says, "Oh, this is a dolly, right?" And there's all this talk about in the media all the time, and even pediatricians saying it was a terrible thing what we did to children, keeping them out of school. So, you reckon that's bad? You should try having your child being the only one ripped out of school, taken away from sport, taken away from socials, taken away from any interaction with any of her friends. And being told we don't know if this will end.
Yeah,
it's completely different scenario.
You said to me, in fact, we were chatting in a group on Zoom. You said to me that you felt that, or the view of you and your wife, Jen, was that you felt that you were in prison. And when we're talking about lockdowns, that's what sprang to my mind. That you said that you felt like you were being in prison during that because of this condition. Just expand on that if you wouldn't mind, please.
Yeah. So when lockdown came along, in some ways
you were already in it, right? You were already in it.
It's like, there was some comfort for us, weirdly, right, in a selfish way, because it's like people are living like us now. People can't go to the footy, they can't go to the concerts, they can't go to So, we're through the other side of we're told we're through the other side, but we would argue we're not of COVID. But I'm in a situation now where if my wife gets COVID, then I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it going to become significantly worse, right?
So what happens with your life? You're explaining to me we're both cricket fans. So you like to go and see the first day's play of the Gabba first test. I think that's one of the things you mentioned. You like to go and see a Boxing Day test at the MCG. When you do those things, what happens afterwards? Or what happens when you just develop a sniffle?
Yeah, so one of the good things is that since 2019, I haven't developed a sniffle because every time I go out, I'm really careful. Mm. And so I'm the weirdo at Chadstone Shopping Centre at the weekend wearing a mask. And I don't socialise very much anymore. And if I do, this time of year, very little because you have to socialise inside. But if I catch up with friends or whatever in the summer months, even though I'm in Melbourne, sometimes in Melbourne, believe it or not, you can go outside. And so just when it's breezy, we sort of catch up then. But the cricket, my wife's family's from northern Victoria, so that's the time of year I get her up there for Christmas, and it was just absolutely exhausting for her, and it takes her a week to recover from the interaction. But I leave her up there, and she stays with family, and then I'm off the leash, right? And then I go with mates to the cricket for a day or two and pretend that I'm 18 all over again and wake up the next day and realise that I'm not. But, and just do what normal blokes do and don't watch the cricket, but enjoy it.
Then what happens afterwards?
Yeah, so what happens is that...
or even just a visit, isn't just a visit to, did you say Chadstone Shopping Centre? you have to isolate thereafter, don't
so
you?
I wear a mask when I go into crowded places like that, right? And so what I do is if I go somewhere where I think, there's a chance of me being exposed, what I do is I isolate another part of the house. I sleep in a different room. And when I come out into the living area, I
For
wear
how
a
many
mask.
days?
And
2 to 3 days, 3 to 4?
about 4 to 5 days.
Right.
And I, do a wrap, each day just to make sure that I'm okay. And then I re-enter the home environment. So it's kind of like one of those things where, socializing is all well and good, but
The cost of it, the cost of it.
The friends who are off going doing something else, and I'm still locked in a room, right? So yeah, it's quite a challenge. And the other thing I do, I actually started last year going up to the Gabba, and weirdly, I've got a friend who's dying of lung cancer, and we said, let's do something. I'll fly up, and another mate from Perth will fly up, and we'll spend a day at the cricket. And he's got cancer, and he's coming to the cricket with us, and he's responded well to the to his treatment. So we've planned to go again this year, amongst all the Poms. But my wife, of the many things that I loved about her when we met, is that she was someone who would come to the footy with me or the cricket and have a beer and enjoy it. I haven't been to the footy or the cricket with her for at least a decade, and she, because of the cognitive aspect of her illness, she can watch a bit of TV, but watching the footy or the tennis where there's a lot of movement, it's really, really tough for her. She barracks for North Melbourne, so probably it's not such a huge loss for her.
Could be worse, Peter. Could be worse.
She'll get cured and she'll start watching and going, what have I been doing the last 30 years?
It's must be a little bit like barracking for Carlton. Look, do you have any sense of optimism? I know that the Health Minister, Federal Health Minister Mark Butler, has made some reasonably positive sounds. It looks like the RACGP's current advice to GPs will change soon. We know that there is a one-off blood test that's been developed in the UK. There must be some cause for optimism.
Yeah, in a weird way, COVID helped us, and we always thought that might be the case. In that it validated the illness, and it got a lot more money going into it. Part of the problem is because there isn't a real test for it. The pharmaceutical companies don't get involved. With other illnesses, a lot of the research just comes from the pharmaceutical companies, spending billions on this or billions on that. There's still a hell of a lot that's done at universities. And, Mark Butler has been supportive, and there's been $1.1 million been put aside to look at the clinical guidelines.
1.1 million? Gee, that's it's not a lot a day, mate, I've got to tell you. But it's something, I suppose.
That's the NHMRC, the National Medical Health and Medical Research Council.
No.
And so they're spending like 3 or 4 years getting input from a whole bunch of people so they can produce new guidelines. In the meantime, people are still being pushed by the RACGP into these treatments. When it comes to So, I inferred that the pharmaceutical companies aren't involved, and so there's a gap. And, we have government, in many cases, to look after places where there's been market failure. So there's a market failure in research from CFS. So over the last 25 years, there's been $7 million spent on research for ME/CFS in this country. That's NHMRC figures. That equates to about $1 patient per year. And in the last allocation was $3 million, and that was in the Morrison government years, right? So we just went through a whole, the party of Medicare. We just went through a period of, the first term of their government, and they allocated nothing.
They did allocate money to long COVID, though, didn't they? But again, we are still dealing with like the Queensland Department of Health study. We're still dealing with this issue that long COVID doesn't exist. But long COVID, there is causation there between long COVID and ME/CFS.
Yeah, so long COVID got 14 million in 2024. And it's good, right? But we don't absolutely know that it's the same conditions, right?
Oh, okay. So causation's not the right term. I use the term causation. There's a correlation.
One of the theories is that it's viral persistence, right? So the virus is still living in tissue somewhere, and and so if that's what they prove to be the case, then they'll go, we've just come up with a drug that gets rid of the virus out of the tissue and we're fixed. And then the ME/CFS people will go, well, what about us?
Yeah.
So there needs to be studies for both. Now, there's lots of really good stuff happening in Australia, believe it or not, and a whole bunch of different universities doing some really interesting stuff. They get no money from the federal government, zero. And so one of the guys, Chris Armstrong, who's based in Melbourne, is just doing some amazing work. He's part of a global team that's doing some stuff. I think their last grant they got the money is from the US government, the US Department of Defence, allocated some money. Now that's all going to stop.
Yes, it will.
With pump. So we need the Australian government to step up and throw some money at it. One of the requests from Emerge was for $200,000, the last budget, so that they could do a small study to work out where research funding should best be spent, and it was knocked back.
Okay, yeah. All right. Well, listeners, there's anyone who is interested or has been affected either directly or indirectly by ME/CFS, you can hit up your local member and put some pressure on. That's one of the things that actually might work. It seems to me that the SBS program that you were on got at least one thing right. This is an invisible illness, and its invisibility has basically been driven by bureaucratic and bureaucratic failure and failures within medical science. Peter, thank you so much for your time today.
Can I just do one call out?
Yeah.
If there's anyone out there that feels that they'd like to help in some way, the organisation I do some work with, called Emerge Australia.
Mm-hmm.
If you can just look up their website and you can swing them a few bucks. Unfortunately, it's just after June 30, but if you could swing them a few bucks, that would be greatly received, because they really do run off the smell of an oily rag, get very little support from the government as well.
Yeah, well said, Peter. So feel free to that might be the starting point. But also, if you are directly or indirectly affected by ME/CFS, feel free to hit up your local member. That's what they're there for. And make the point that after Elon Musk and Bobby Kennedy Jr. have had their impacts on global health, that the Australian government has to step up, and right now it's not doing a lot of it. Peter, thank you for your time. I want to just remind listeners to get behind Emerge Australia. It's just www.emerge.org.
.au.
That's it, no .au. But yeah, so feel free to have a look through there. We see multiple failures from medical science based on this sort of arrogant view of, shall we say, constrained knowledge, that often we find a lot of medical people are not open to new developments, are not aware of them, don't make themselves aware of them. And as we discussed with a lot of medical specialists, some of them aren't bursting with personality either. But obviously, Peter telling his story, the story of his wife, the story of his daughter, the story of his family, and how they've been impacted on it, is a very powerful lesson for all of us, just to understand how difficult life must be for ME/CFS sufferers. Thank you for your time today, Peter.
Well, thank you, Jack, and thanks for the opportunity to tell our story. And unlike the experience we had with SBS, it's nice to be able to have a narrative around what a terrible illness this is, and how people feel neglected, and it isn't just the case that people just need to listen to their bodies and get on with things.
Yeah. I've been listening to my body for a very long time, mate, and the only thing it does is make fart noises. So there's no accounting for that. I was going to joke and say, look, we were going to get a cooker in and we'll chop in a good hour and a half worth of talking about them healing themselves. But of course, we won't be doing that.
Well, you could have got Jenny GP just about, and that could suffice as your cooker.
Oh, just fine. I guess the final question: were you ever, or was Jen ever drawn to alternative medical treatments?
Yeah. So we try. I mean, it's one of those things where you're just desperate. You'll try so many different things, and so acupuncture, those sorts of things. But even like faith healing, all this weird and wonderful stuff. And it's just because you're desperate. It's like, spend $100 and try it. We even did one of Jenny's friends, because one of the problems is a problem with the gut. The whole gut flora is all messed up, and that's a common thing with people in CFS. So, that's with fecal transplants,
right?
So, and these are all terribly expensive treatments. So we thought,
why not
give that a go? And it's a bit, what they do is they apply the first treatment, and then it becomes a DIY job, right?
Yeah.
And I say to people that some people think that making love is the ultimate expression of love, but they've never been able to administer poo transplants before. That's got to be the ultimate. But unfortunately, it didn't work for Jenny. But
I can't imagine why. I can't imagine why that didn't work. Coffee enemas, I suppose, would also be under consideration. This whole raft of stuff
there is a real science behind it, and but it certainly didn't work for Jenny. It's not a wacky thing. It's something that has some real science to it. But,
that sounds a little bit different to some of the nonsense that comes from the sort of the new age treatment. And look, anyone suffering a chronic illness, potentially life-ending illness, is going to consider these things. And this is what we talk about in the conditional release program. Don't ignore the medical science. It might be flawed. It is. We've just discovered that it is deeply flawed. But if you walk away from let's say, if I had walked away from my cancer treatment, there's no way I'd be alive today. So, there is a great pool of new age science, but generally, for the most part, as we've discovered, is pretty much junk. Having said that, there are some issues with our medicos that should be it's just a failure to reproduce treatment advice from the RACGP, knowing that 5, 6, 7 years ago it's all been changed in the UK and the United States. I find that absolutely disgraceful. But we will keep our listeners informed, just to particularly to see how Peter got on with SBS. I didn't watch the program. I've got almost sort of pathological hatred of it because they did platform anti-vaxxers and cookers. But ostensibly, from what Peter tells us, there should be action taken there. And we'll keep you advised of all of that. And we'll keep you advised on Peter's condition as we go through. Thank you for your time once again, mate. And it's been a pleasure to have you on. I know life's very, very difficult, but at least we are contributing to raising awareness in our own little niche of the internet.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jack.
I don't think I ever want to talk to any of those people.
Fuck me!